Hello, I'm Fiona Murchie and I'm delighted to introduce you to this conversation with Tom McGinness, who's the global leader of family business KPMG Private Enterprise. And we're here today to talk about the regenerative power of family businesses. Hello, Tom. So it's really nice to see you.
Good morning, Fiona, and thank you very much for having me.
No, well, it's a fascinating report and with lots of takeaways for any organisation that's looking to regenerate. I myself come from a long family history of farming, and I've often thought, farmers are really sort of entrepreneurial.
Absolutely.
A lot of it resonated, and of course our own business here. But I think there's lots of things that people can learn about the future of work and where things are heading, and resilience, and people moving on to the next stage with their businesses. So let's hear a bit more about the survey and how it came about and who you worked with on it.
Of course, Fiona. Yeah. So we did this survey in conjunction with a global organisation called STEP. And STEP is an organisation of academic scholars and professors based at universities across the globe. This is our third year with STEP doing the survey. And we managed to survey just under 3,000 family businesses across the globe. So we're very excited about it because some of the findings are incredibly interesting. And as you rightly say, I think can apply to businesses across the piece,
So family businesses are broadly recognised for their focus on creating long-term value and resilience in good and bad times. So can you just draw out some of the illustrations of this?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we discovered was that family businesses, despite sometimes people thinking differently, are incredibly innovative. So as a result of the pandemic, many family businesses had to kind of reinvent themselves. And one of the ways that they did that was involving the next generation much earlier, perhaps, than they might have anticipated. And of course, as I'm sure you're aware, the next generation, you come from a farming business, so you'll know this, the next generation have their own values. And one of the things that we have noticed is that the next generation coming through have much stronger values about things like social responsibility and taking care of the environment and the climate. And this is dictating to some extent how family businesses reinvent themselves going forward.
And what would you say the key findings of the report are?
So one thing in particular is that the highest performing family businesses are those that manage to retain a sense of being entrepreneurial, throughout the generations, but are now combining that with what we call socio-emotional wealth, which is a bit of a fancy phrase for being in touch with what's happening in their communities and really caring about what happens with the wider environment. And so the best performing ones are able to combine those two things, plus, of course, having strong leadership. And that's probably the biggest finding. The most disappointing thing, and I'll own up to this straight away, Fiona, is, we were disappointed about the fact that less than 20% of the family businesses that we interviewed had a chief executive that was female. So we were really hoping that family businesses would be leading the way in terms of diversity, but it feels like there is still some way to go on that.
But on the positives, I think you did find that female business members were leading technology or driving technology.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And obviously, I think bringing a different perspective to the boards of technology, the technology aspect, more challenge. And one of the points that we noticed was that, the pandemic was a difficult time for everyone. But one advantage I think that family businesses had was that the older generation had been through a crisis before, whether it was the global financial crisis or something like that. And so they were kind of in the spirit of the UK, keep calm, but carry on. Don't get too anxious about it. And the combination of that calmness with the technology comfort that the younger generation had was a great combination. And so what we're seeing now as we come out of the pandemic, hopefully, is that many family businesses are in a really good place to take advantage of the technology improvements that have been made. And we've all seen them coming out of the pandemic, a bit like you and I are sitting in our homes today, but having a really good conversation as if we were in the same room. And, if you think about pre-pandemic, I think many of us were pretty skeptical that that would actually happen. But in fact, it's been an amazing success,
And also, I think the report showed that family businesses were more willing to take risks and jump on board new initiatives.
Absolutely, Fiona. It's a great point. I've seen many family businesses reinvent themselves during the pandemic. I mean, I'll give you one example. A manufacturing client of mine that was manufacturing basically printing materials, but actually reinvented themselves to manufacture protective COVID materials, and suddenly found themselves with a revenue line that was increasing dramatically because of just where we were. So that kind of agility, the ability to kind of move quickly, is again something which family businesses have, which I think is much more difficult in a listed company, for example.
So more agile and possibly more resourceful?
Absolutely, yeah.
Are you able to sort of describe the leadership style or some of the different leadership styles you came across?
Absolutely. So we kind of focused on three. We focused on, I guess, what we might call the traditional authoritarian leadership, where the founder is the man in charge or the lady in charge, and they kind of dictate what happens with not as much collaboration as we might expect. So there's an authoritarian style. There's a kind of charismatic leadership style where, one individual really carries everybody with them because they're incredibly charismatic and energetic. And then the third style, which we think is the one that has been most fitting for the pandemic and what's coming out of it, is what we are calling transformational leadership. So leaders who are able to anticipate what's happening, but also take everybody with them and consult with the wide variety of stakeholders that businesses have, whether it's employees or lenders, the banks, whatever. And so, our conclusion was that the businesses which have a transformational leadership style are likely to be the ones that are most successful as we come out of the pandemic.
That's really interesting, and that fits with, I think, as you know, we're holding this Future of Work festival, which your organisation is involved with, and it'd be fascinating there if you can possibly think of other things that can be carried across about this transformational leadership that are wider, and maybe tips that other people might pick up on.
Absolutely. I mean, I think your festival is choosing an incredibly relevant topic. Many businesses, including KPMG, are struggling with how do you attract people back to the office, for example. And I think, the world has changed. I think hybrid working is probably what's going to happen going forward. And obviously in the UK, Fiona, you'll be aware of this, there's a massive talent gap. And I think for the first time in recent history, the number of job vacancies sort of outnumbers the people looking for work. One of the things that I think family businesses can do is really appeal to the younger generation looking for work, because they often have a very strong sense of purpose, a very strong sense of community. And what we're hearing from younger graduates, for example, who are even coming to KPMG, they're saying, well, the salary is one thing and that's great, but what can you tell me about KPMG's approach to ESG?
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell me that KPMG is doing about society and charity and all of these much, bigger macro issues around social responsibility? So I think there's a takeaway there for any employer to say, when talent is scarce and we want to recruit it and retain it, how do we differentiate ourselves? And one way is, I think, to be really clear about the role that you play in society and the environment going forwards.
Mm. And that raises the issue of good businesses and good work. Can you perhaps explain a little bit about that? Because I think that's where we're attracting talent, isn't it, and retaining it. But do you think these family organisations and maybe SMEs on the whole are better at doing that?
So I would have said this is something that every organisation needs to focus on at the moment. Family businesses, I think, have in their DNA a strong sense of purpose, so they ought to be able to leverage that more. And there is something about working for perhaps a slightly smaller organisation which makes people feel that they have greater influence in what can happen. There is definitely something about employers more closely involving their employees in the strategy of the business. And I'll give you just one concrete example of a business that I work with where they decided to create a shadow board. So this was a selection of younger, diverse managers in the business. And their job, frankly, was to challenge the executive and say, well, you've developed this strategy, but is it actually right given what we know is happening in the younger generation coming through? And I think that's a really innovative way of getting buy-in, but also providing a different kind of challenge, because not everybody has all the answers.
Absolutely. So it's also about the diversity of people and the diversity of thought. So that's also the way of attracting more people. So you mentioned earlier on that you're a bit disappointed in the representation of women, and I presume also other groups as well. What can people do to encourage diverse thinking and diverse organisations?
So I mean, it's a great challenge, and I think again every business is focused on it. I mean, for example, and again I'll just take KPMG because it's the business I know best. We have actually appointed a head of diversity and inclusion, whose responsibility is to really challenge the organisation internally. Are we doing everything we can do? And I think many other businesses could follow suit, because I think what it does is it elevates it to board level, so the business is taking it seriously. And then I think one other thought that we saw is thinking about alliances that perhaps the business could form, that would create different channels into a diverse population, local communities, local organizations, so that you're starting to build a different population where perhaps you might attract people from diverse backgrounds. So I think these are some of the things that I think businesses could do, frankly, quite easily if they have the will to do it.
And also in your report, the power of community and whether families were particularly good at hooking in. I suppose what might be your advice to the family firms, then they need to look into some other communities as well.
Absolutely. And, I think if you think of our biggest and best known family businesses in the UK, and I'll just mention one, if you look at the impact that JCB has in the region in which it is based, it's absolutely phenomenal. So it's become, a brand, not just a global brand, but importantly, a local brand for the people that it employs. And I think there are many family businesses that could do the same. Because again, I think people have, one of the things that came out of the pandemic is that because you couldn't go anywhere, people suddenly reconnected with their local communities more. And that became more important, not less important during the pandemic. And I don't think it's something that we'll throw away as we come out of the pandemic. I still think it will be something that is important to people going forward.
Yes, and that links also into well-being and engagement, which are very closely related as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Fiona. And I think, you raise a great point, which is, perhaps I could just mention, mental health. Many family businesses that I know recognize that the mental health of their employees was going to become really significant and important as the pandemic went on. And they took special steps to widen, if you like, the benefit packages that employees were able to take advantage of, so that it wasn't just about the usual, BUPA, if you like, if I can use that example, around physical health, but also to extend that so that people could seek support, whether it was counselling or anything else, to help them deal with the anxieties that inevitably came out of the pandemic. And I think that's a very forward-looking initiative, which is absolutely here to stay.
And I know there's strong evidence also, isn't there, that organisations and people with a sense of purpose tend to thrive better. Is that something that came out as well? You mentioned purpose in the report.
Yes, absolutely. And the analogy that I would make is that, as well as organizations thinking about their purpose, I'm pretty sure that all of us as individuals, as we went through the pandemic, started to question things like, am I doing the right things? Am I spending my time in the right way? Are there better things I could be doing for the wider society rather than perhaps what I'm doing at the moment? So I think there's been a reawakening of the power of purpose in everyday life, not just in employment.
Yes. And then this sense of entrepreneurialism, which you talked about. And of course, that can be taken over to other organisations if they apply it to a team. So perhaps you could just expand a little bit on the entrepreneurial spirit that you found.
Absolutely. I mentioned that the combination of retaining that entrepreneurialism plus the social responsibility piece was really powerful. I mean, on the entrepreneurialism side, family businesses, I've seen many of them, for example, create a research and development team, which looks at different products, different markets, allows people to think more innovatively so that keeps that entrepreneurial spirit alive. And I think the other trend is bringing non-family executives and non-executives onto the board with different skills and different experiences so that they bring a fresh challenge and a fresh perspective. And again, what that does is drive that entrepreneurial spirit. So I think there's many things that any business can do to bring that to life, if you like. Great.
So we're all pushing forward with transformation, and I would recommend to everybody that this the Regenerative Power of Family Business report is absolutely a really good read, whether you're a family business or not. So thank you very much, Tom McGinness, for joining us today, and we look forward to talking to you again and perhaps learning what your next piece of research is. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I really appreciate you asking me along.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
The Regenerative Power of Family Business report can be accessed via the KPMG Private Enterprise link shown here. And if you want to find out more about the Future of Work Festival, please access relocateglobal.com and find out more about the festival in June. Thank you for joining us.